It was a chilly, moonless night when my car broke down on a desolate stretch of Highway 66. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I cursed my luck and pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but of course, there was no signal. I glanced around, shivering slightly. The only sounds were the distant hoots of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I'd heard the horror stories about hitchhiking, but what choice did I have? I grabbed my backpack and started walking, hoping to flag down a passing car. For an hour, not a single vehicle passed by, and my hope began to wane. The cold was seeping into my bones when I finally saw headlights approaching in the distance. I stuck out my thumb and waved, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. The car slowed down and came to a stop beside me. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, the kind you see in movies about serial killers. The window rolled down, revealing a man in his late 50s with a grizzled beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah, my car broke down a few miles back. Can you take me to the nearest town?" I replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. He nodded and unlocked the passenger door. "Hop in." I hesitated for a moment, the horror stories flashing through my mind, but the cold and isolation pushed me to accept his offer. I climbed into the truck, and he started driving. The interior smelled of cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. It was dark, with only the faint light from the dashboard illuminating his face. "I'm Joe," he said, eyes fixed on the road. "Chris," I replied, forcing a smile. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. I glanced at Joe occasionally, but he seemed focused on driving. I tried to relax, telling myself I was being paranoid. "Where are you headed?" Joe asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Just trying to get to the nearest town." "Anywhere with a phone signal," I answered. He nodded, not saying anything else. The road stretched on, seemingly endless. After a few more minutes, Joe spoke again. "You know, these roads can be dangerous at night," he said, his tone almost conversational. I swallowed hard, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "Yeah, I guess so." He glanced at me, a strange smile playing on his lips. "You never know who you might run into." I laughed nervously, not sure how to respond. Joe didn't say anything more, and the silence grew oppressive. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We passed a sign that read, "Shelbyville, 20 miles. Relief washed over me. Just 20 more miles, and I'd be safe. Joe slowed the truck and turned onto a narrow, unmarked road. "Shortcut," he said, noticing my puzzled expression. I didn't argue, but a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. The road was rough and overgrown, the trees closing in around us. The headlights barely penetrated the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the road ahead. After what felt like an eternity, Joe stopped the truck. "Gotta check something under the hood," he said, getting out. I watched him walk to the front of the truck, his figure barely visible in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest. Something didn't feel right. I reached for my phone, but there was still no signal. I considered making a run for it, but the darkness and unfamiliar terrain made the idea seem foolish. Joe returned, wiping his hands on a rag. "All set," he said, climbing back into the truck. We drove on, the atmosphere even more tense than before. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, Joe turned to me, his face twisted into a sinister grin. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. I froze, my mind racing. Not really," I stammered. Joe chuckled, "A.S. A sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You will," he said ominously. Before I could react, he swerved the truck off the road and into the woods. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Joe reached over and grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Let me go," I shouted, struggling to free myself. He laughed again, his eyes gleaming with a madness that terrified me. "You're not going anywhere," he said. I managed to wrench my arm free and slammed my elbow into his face. He yelped in pain, momentarily losing control of the truck. I took the opportunity to unlock the door and jump out, rolling onto the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. I could hear Joe cursing and the sound of his boots crunching through the underbrush as he chased me. Panic drove me forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stumbled into a clearing and stopped, my heart pounding. There was no sign of Joe. I took a moment to catch my breath, listening for any sound of pursuit. The forest was silent, the trees standing like dark sentinels. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth, and I was yanked backward. I struggled, but Joe's grip was too strong. He dragged me to the ground, pinning me down with his weight. "Thought you could get away, huh?" he snarled, his breath hot against my ear. I thrashed and kicked, desperate to escape. My hand found a rock, and I swung it at his head. He grunted and loosened his grip, giving me the chance to push him off and run. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the side of the road. I lay there, gasping for breath, too exhausted to move. Eventually, headlights appeared in the distance, and a car pulled over. A kind-looking woman got out and hurried over to me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I nodded weakly, tears streaming down my face. "Help me," I whispered. She helped me into her car and drove me to the nearest town, where I called the police. They searched the woods but found no trace of Joe or his truck. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't escaped, and I never hitchhiked again. The experience left me scarred, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Every night, I relive those terrifying moments, knowing how close I came to becoming another statistic, another lost soul swallowed by the night.